Thank you, sir.
I think it was, okay. Um, so I'll start from the beginning. We would like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Carla Campbell Jackson, Ms. Linda Foster, Mr. Ben Ryburn, and the rest of the NAACP Executive Board for their direction for this project. We would like to also thank Coach Thomas, Jasmine Jordan, and Anaya Thompson for their insight on the impact that race and COVID-19 had on the education community in Bloomington-Normal. And a special shout out to Gabriel Carrillo for providing guidance as our executive mentor, and also James Jones and Dr. Peter Coffin for directing the ICC program at ISU. The next slide, I'll pass it over to Megan, who will discuss the focuses on our project.
Thanks, Josiah. Our team's focuses for this project were revolving around wealth, income, and education, and we narrowed that down into 5 subcategories, being wealth inequality, income inequality, school funding, internet access, and race and racism in the classroom. Jake's going to go ahead and introduce our project as a whole.
Thank you so much, Megan. So for this project, we combined interviews from community members as well as external research and data to talk about the issues that Megan just described on the local, state, and federal levels, wherever it was appropriate. We chose areas of focus and analyzed problems, and where we were able to, we tried to research some solutions. And as Megan mentioned, the problems we'll be looking into are wealth inequality, income inequality, school funding, internet access, and race and racism in the classroom. So all of these issues are kind of interlocking and they intersect. And we're going to try and provide solutions that hopefully address the way that these intersect. And we also wanted to mention that as we go throughout this presentation, if anyone has any questions, we'll be answering questions at the end, but feel free to put a question in the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll get to it then. That way, you don't have to worry about writing it down, and we'll be sure to address it. And with that, we'll get started first with wealth inequality. And Josiah, I think you'll take it from here.
Thank you, Jacob. So I'll start talking about the wealth inequality. And starting with the wealth disparities on a federal scope, racial injustice and discrimination has erased $16 trillion from the U.S. gross domestic product, or also known as GDP, over the last 2 decades. If the issue were addressed today and actions were taken, then $5 trillion could be added to the economy over the next 5 years. The opportunity to generate wealth over time based on who you are as a person is the most robust building block of discrimination. In 2016, the last year which data was available, the median Black family had about $17,150 in wealth, while the median white family had about $171,000 in wealth. And that's from the Francis and Weller article that was written in 2020. In addition, with that article, Hispanic families have a median and mean wealth of $36,100. Liquid asset poverty is a measure of liquid savings that households must cover for expenses for 3 months if they experience a sudden job loss, a medical emergency, or another financial crisis leading to a loss of stable income. 25% of households in Illinois are liquid asset poor compared to 65% of Black households. It is important to put this into context today, where 400 of the richest American billionaires have more total wealth than all 10 million Black American households combined. And that's from the Williamson article written in 2020. This issue also affects the Bloomington-Normal area as well. We believe that the education system can create a strong foundation and give our communities and future generations the tools they need that can reduce the wealth and economic disparities in the area and in our country. Wealth already does play one notable role in education. States usually send extra school funding to communities with limited housing wealth to make up for the fact that they can't collect much in property taxes, stated in an article published by AmericanProgress.org. From my research, I discovered an article curated by the Chalkbeat titled "The Wealth Gap and How the Education World Fails to Fully Measure Students' Economic Disadvantage." They stated that the education world thinks about family income, but rarely accounts for family wealth. High income and highly educated people of color still have much less wealth than their white peers. Wealth shapes educational opportunity. It can affect where a family lives, and therefore where their children attend elementary, middle, and high school, and as well as college. It can influence too whether those children experience material hardship and the degree of their stress in their household, which can affect their ability to focus in school. Given this for the solutions, given this for the federal wealth tax could provide an important tool for redistribution. One study has found that if a 3% marginal tax at wealth above 1 billion had been placed from 1982, the share of wealth owned in 2018 by the 400 richest Americans would have fallen to 3.5 to 2%. One use for this increased revenue would be in the funding for K-12 schools and higher education. K-12 funding would be examined below in further detail, but this money could also be used to invest in Black and Latino students being able to attend college without acquiring debt through expanding existing loan and grant programs. This money could also be given to states to help fix inequalities in state spending on education, which in turn could be used in schools to provide programs on financial education. The tax on the wealth has been a conversation for a long time, but if the tax dollars were redistributed to lower income communities and schools, this extra funding can accommodate for less wealthy families and students and can help provide the tools and resources that the students can use to help build a stronger future. It's not necessarily giving the students the money for extra things and non-necessary objects, but generally giving the students the tools they need to be successful, but it's up to them to use it. For the area, instead of making policies and laws, the communities can truly invest in education, in the education of their students, not with money, but with their time. Having programs that teach students financial literacy and financial skills that can help them potentially grow and build on their own wealth. Teachers and faculty can create a curriculum in schools that can teach students what it takes to be financially free and also avoid getting into a financial hole. Now, I give it on to Clinton, who will talk about the income inequality.
Thank you, Josiah. Yeah. So, as we well know, an integral part of wealth is income. And on the next slide, yeah, this data shows how the real median income has been by race and ethnicity from the year 2000 to 2019. So this is actually the US aggregated data, not for any state. This is just for the US. So as can be seen here, the Black median income has consistently been lower over this whole period. That's from 2000 to 2019. That's for the Hispanic comes next, followed by the whites, and Asians are shown to have the highest median household income since over the duration of this period. So this sort of gives an indication of how income is, dispersed across races. So on the next slide, yeah, I talk about how I bring it a bit closer because our focus was on Bloomington, and the Gini index is an index which is a measure of poverty, or is a measure of how income is spread. The Gini index for Illinois is actually 0.482, while that for the US is 0.478. And what that means is that income is widely spread, or there's disparity in income for people in Illinois, even more than the national average. And this is when we talk about it for Bloomington, I found that the per capita income for Asians is about 51,000. That for whites is around 39,000. For Blacks, that's around 22,000. And for Hispanics, that's around 19,000. Showing that for Bloomington, the income is really varied, with Asians having the highest per capita income and Hispanics having the least. Now, this leads to lots of effects, as you can imagine. Some of the research has shown that some of the effects of low income on education is people or children from low income tend to have lower supervision. They also have they lack proper role modeling, among other problems. And on the next slide, I also show how the disparity in income translates to, educational attainment among other measures. So this data is actually for Bloomington, Illinois. The population shows the number of whites, blacks, Hispanic, and Asian. And we see that, so I formatted the data, the table in such a way that the blue color is sort of, should I say, the least measure or the favorable one. The red represents, bad or unfavorable. So as can be seen here, as I said earlier, Hispanics have a per capita income of around 19,000. That's in Bloomington, Illinois here. And as can be seen, as a result, the percentage of Hispanics with educational attainment less than high school diploma is 21%. That is quite huge. And that for whites is around 2.8%. With the black being 5.03, and the Asians being 3.35. And the percentage of those who with educational attainment of bachelor's degree or higher, those who were able to achieve bachelor's degree or higher, for the Hispanic home, we found that was just 1%. And again, as I said earlier, the per capita income for Hispanics was considerably lower, 19,000. And we find that Asians have the highest educational attainment for bachelor's degree or higher, and that's around 63%. And as I said earlier, Asians have the highest per capita income in Bloomington too. And so we go, the next measure is for health insurance for the bracket age 19 to 64. This data for 2018. We find that Asians are able to afford the most health insurance. Hispanics fare rather badly here. Again, showing that the fact that they lack, or the fact that their per capita income is so low is a huge contributor to this. So we also found that percentage of households with no computers, Hispanics have 9.4% of Hispanics have no computers, followed by blacks, 8.08%, and Asians have the least. Translating back to the least, like I said, the income. So the percentage of households with computers but no internet, Hispanic again measured higher, followed by blacks. And then a percentage with income level below the poverty status was actually topped by the black community with 31.18%, showing that a lot of the black folks in Bloomington-Normal have income below the poverty status, while Asians have the least amount of people below the poverty income status. So that's how the measures look across Bloomington-Normal. So on the next slide, I try to show how these issues, the causes and the effects are interrelated. So given that low income level is not necessarily the hub, but since it's my topic, I color coded it in red. So you see that the low income level translates to difficulty in accessing internet or computer, as shown by the previous slide. And this is a challenge in studying, and this leads to low educational attainment, which leads to low income level again. And the low income level leads again to low access to healthcare. As we saw that Hispanics had the least access to health insurance. Now, low access to healthcare can lead to poor health, and this is a challenge to studying, leading again to low educational attainment, and low educational attainment contributes significantly to low income level. Low income level again translates to poverty, and this is how this chart is actually formatted, showing how these problems and their resulting effects are actually intertwined. So for the next slide, I make some suggestions on how to solve them, some of the problems. How to solve some of the problems, for short term and long term. So for the short term, we can think of mentoring groups, And when we talked about this, our executive mentor, Gabriel, suggested we could either talk to the Watchdogs or 100 Black Men to provide mentors for the youth here, because it has also been shown that by the American Psychological Association that minority groups tend to have most of their kids being young caregivers, and the young caregivers spend, are not they lack proper role modeling and other things. But providing mentoring group for such people can, build their character and then enable them to do better at school, because the research has shown that there's a good correlation between proper behavior and proper behavior input and doing well in school. Well, for the problem of lack of computers, we can NAACP. I researched and found that there are groups like With Courses and Computer With Courses, which provide personal computers. So the NAACP could partner with them to provide the personal computers for household which lack these things. And the next one is equitable school funding, which I would leave my partner Caesar to talk more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Clinton. All right, so my area of research focus was on school funding in Illinois. And then as I looked more into school funding, we found that a lot of large disparities exist in this as well. And then we can move on to this next slide. And then in this first figure by Ushamersky and Williams, it shows kind of the spectrum of the gap between the highest poverty districts and the lowest poverty districts in the state from a national level. So Ohio had the largest gap, with the highest poverty districts receiving 22% more than their lowest poverty district on the far left there. And then while Illinois was on the complete opposite, with almost 20% less funding for their districts that were the highest poverty zones. And we'll move on to this next slide. So this is another aspect of the school funding in Illinois, where it shows about 706 of the school districts are underfunded, and that results in around 1.7 million students. And so in this graph by Advanced Illinois, it shows that and these districts are mostly including English learners, Black, Latino, and other low-income students, and how they have 70% less funding than they need to get to an adequate level. And then we'll move on to this next slide. And so this kind of just gives an overview of Illinois' K through 12 funding sources. And this graphic by equitable funding shows how it mostly comes from local revenues, and that can fluctuate a lot more. We'll move on to the next slide. And so while looking at school funding, you got to zoom out of the picture a little bit and look at Illinois' budget as a whole. And it has a lot of looming problems that people have seen. And you can see in this first image here with the kind of ballooning pension debt crisis in Illinois, as you can see in this graph by Bauer, and how the pension debt is now in the hundreds of billions. Let's see, it's over almost at 140 billion, and that was in 2018. And then on this figure on the right, it's just kind of comparing Illinois' teachers receiving the most retirement benefits compared to other states here at around 2.94 million. We can move on to the next slide. And so when looking at school funding, one has to try and balance kind of the budget as a whole as well, because as this problem grows, it'll just kind of constrain the spending for other services. And so when looking at pensions and possible restructuring, some areas that may be able to be looked at is the cost of living adjustments are among the highest in the nation compared to other states. Illinois also has the highest final average teacher salaries and early retirement. And then these higher percentages kind of compound over time as they're not paid off, and they'll just keep increasing for future generations. But the question as a whole is just how to bring the cost down in a fair way for the retirees, for the taxpayers, and then for the ones that are most vulnerable from the core services that might be cut to pay for this. And so a recent ballot initiative last year was the fair tax proposal, which was rejected. This may have been due to kind of Illinois' history of fiscal mismanagement without genuine reform. And so there may have been a lack of trust from the public. And we can move on to the next slide. And so Illinois by Kiplinger found that it was the least friendly tax state in the nation, with first looking at the state income tax at 4.95%. While that may seem low, that is on the high income tax rate for middle class taxpayers. And then for average state and local tax rate at 8.82%, that is the 7th highest combined sales tax in the US. And then for property taxes, Illinois is the 2nd highest in the US. And so one thing to kind of keep in mind with this is we can look at recent population changes in Illinois. And then this last, let's see, from July 2019 to July 2020, almost 80,000 residents left Illinois, which was the highest since World War II. So one reason for that might be this high tax rate and kind of an increased awareness of debt problems in Illinois. And so that might be turning away more people and preventing others from coming to move in here as well. And we can move on. Thank you. Now we'll continue on with internet access.
So Hunter and I will be talking about internet access around the US as well as Bloomington. So before we look at the graph on the next slide, we should know that according to USA Facts 2020, overall in the US, 14% of students, or 9 million students, aging from 3 to 18 years old don't have access to the internet at home. This is a huge problem, especially like during the pandemic, because everything is taking place online for students. And as we continue like to the future, we know more and more students will be having laptops, and without internet access at home, it would be pretty hard to do homework at home. So we should look at who is getting affected the most. If you want to go on to the next slide. From this graph, we notice how our marginalized communities are affected. At the top, we see how the American Indian / Native Alaskan students are the hardest hit. You can see how from this graph, how roughly 38% of these students don't have internet access. As we move down, we can also see how 20% of Black students in the US don't have access to the internet, and as well as a Hispanic community at 17%. We also looked at District 87. So District 87 is the district where Bloomington students attend school. It is important to see the demographics of the students because from this graph, we can see how Black and brown students are at a disadvantage because of the lack of internet access or computer access, without also forgetting about the American Indian / Native Alaskan students. So moving on to the next slide, we can see in this first graph, which is taken from the census.gov, we see what the US government considers a low-income household. And then in that next graph, you can also see how being low income relates to not having internet access. So as your income drops, the possibilities of you having internet access at home drops as well. You can also see here that there is an even greater possibility that you have no computer access as your income drops as well. So here in Bloomington, according to the Illinois report card, District 87 has 57.6% of students who come from low income households. So knowing this, we can assume students lack the necessary resources, which is internet and computers, so that they could be able to learn from home. We can move on to the next slide. So we can see the adversities our marginalized communities face. At the federal level, we see the unequal access to the internet, as well as how COVID-19 has exacerbated or made this problem worse. Locally, according to the Illinois report card, District 87 has 22.7 Black students and 14.8% Hispanic students. Knowing this and looking back at the graphs from earlier that broke down, how many students are left without internet access, we can assume how our communities are affected here in Bloomington. While also mentioning that 57.6% of our students come from low-income households. So now I'm gonna pass it over to Hunter so he can talk about some solutions.
So a short-term solution that was used by Bloomington's District 87 was they offered free internet through T-Mobile hotspots, which was limited one per family. And I say this is a good short-term solution because hotspots tend to offer much lower speeds and have connectivity issues compared to your own private Wi-Fi. It would be good to follow up this solution by helping families who took this hotspot and helping them get their own private Wi-Fi established. A federal program though that is currently being used, but not to its full potential, of course, is the Lifeline program, which is ran by the FCC. And what is it? Well, it offers discounted mobile and fixed broadband for qualifying low-income consumers. And how are people eligible for it? Well, if your income is at or below 135% of the federal poverty guideline, you qualify, or also if you qualify for government programs such as SNAP, SSI, and Medicaid. So how does Lifeline affect students? Well, for low-income families who rely on this program, they do not receive quality internet access. On average, people who use Lifeline, they get around 3 to 5 megabits per second of internet access, which is much lower than the national average. A lot of national averages are estimated to be anywhere from the 30s all the way up to the hundreds in the United States, and it's only increasing every year. And a problem with the Lifeline program is it doesn't increase at the same rate as the entire country, and especially during dire times with COVID, where rates need to be increased with much more internet access being consumed. It's not keeping up with demand. And most schools today, due to COVID, they use Zoom to teach virtually. And Zoom themselves recommend a minimum speed of 1.5 megabits per second that have limited connectivity issues. And so if you're a household with multiple children at school, they're gonna have a hard time having quality access to learning. The screen's gonna be blurry, they can't read the screen, can't hear their teacher properly. So it just leads to more issues, and they have to spend more time studying, which they may not have. It's just everything piles up on each other. So another issue with the Lifeline program is people simply aren't educated about it. According to the FCC, there's an estimated 33 million households who are eligible for the program, but only 9 million are using it, which is roughly 26% as of January 2021. And there's a big disparity between states who use the program, such as Oklahoma has a 45% participation rate, while as Wyoming has less than 1% participation rate. So it'd be good to, if they could provide data on why people aren't signing up, if they're simply not educated in it, or the quality of internet they're providing is not enough for their needs. And something good that happened recently is the FCC developed the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which was initiated this past January and is finally authorized by the FCC. And they're expecting to accept applicants beginning this May. And it's great because it not only targets households with internet access issues, but also computer access issues. So with this program, eligible households can receive a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a laptop, as long as they contribute between $10 and $50 for the purchase price. And they could also receive a monthly discount for their broadband service up to $50 per household, which is great to allow households to get a much better internet access so they can meet their demands. And who are eligible for this program? Well, it's much more accessible. And if you could go to the next slide, please. If you receive benefits such as free, reduced price school lunches, you are now eligible for this program. So now those students who are in need of the quality internet to allow them to have the same learning experience as their fellow students, they can now get that through this program by getting better internet services and possibly even a computer if they don't even have one. This is a great move in the right direction. And another thing that recently happened was Biden introduced a $100 billion broadband plan earlier this month. And it's an infrastructure package, which is intended to not only get Americans in rural areas connected to broadband, but also to make broadband more affordable to ensure low income people to get access. And a solution that Bloomington can use later as more programs like this are introduced and actually passed is they could try to turn internet into a public utility, which has been done in few cities in America, which has shown great results. It not only lowers the cost of internet, but also increases the internet that is offered to people. Now I'm going to pass it over to Megan, who will be talking about race and racism in the classroom.
Thanks, Hunter. So as Hunter said, I researched race and racism in the classroom. If you want to go to the next slide there, we can talk about some problems first. Discussions about race and racism in the classroom can be a touchy subject for some teachers and students, both in terms of historically based discussions and contemporary ones. In most classrooms today, students learn about all white American history, but as Elaine Wu, who's a regular contributor to USC's School of Education magazine, describes, in terms of Black history, it's widely recognized that students generally learn about three big topics: slavery, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. Aside from these major areas, the details about Black American history since the beginning of the country are largely omitted in classes. This isn't just an issue of respect for the history of groups besides white people, it has huge implications for the way students understand the present. Donald Earl Collins, a lecturer of history at American University in DC, describes how high school history students learn about the laws passed by whites in power, but they don't learn about how they failed to include provisions for Black citizens. Today's systemic racism is built into our culture and it has its roots in our country's history. Without lessons about redlining, restrictions to voting for Americans of color, omission from welfare programs like the New much less of a chance to understand, arrive to where we are now. Today, we're living through a time of heightened social and political unrest as our nation is currently turning its eyes to the issues of systemic racism on a national scale and police brutality, specifically in a way that is unprecedented in this century. The importance of discussing race and racism in the classroom isn't only to help students understand the origins of its current unrest. Bettina L. Love summarizes it best. She's an African-American associate professor of educational theory and practice at the University of Georgia. Love wrote in Education Today, teachers who disregard the impact of racism on Black children's schooling, experiences, resources, communities, and parent interactions will do harm to children of color. This ignorance is not just a painful sign of a blatant lack of information. A function of racism is to erase the history and contributions of people of color. It's a dangerous situation as these teachers go on to take jobs in schools filled with Black and brown children. Moving on to the next slide, I'll introduce some potential solutions to these problems, I reached out to the English and Social Studies department chairs in Unit 5, and I reached out to a Unit 5 history teacher and 2 Unit 5 students, all 3 of whom were recommended to me by Dr. Carla Campbell-Jackson. Not all individuals responded to my request for information, but of those I connected with, I interviewed individuals from Zoom and over email. I asked them some questions about race and racism in the classroom, what they've experienced and observed, and what the standards are for addressing these topics in school and the role of race in history classes. And I combined all of this interview data with existing research to present some solutions. Firstly, multicultural classes aimed at exploring all sorts of different cultures are important, their histories, values, and their struggles. These classes provide all students with a better sense of social and cultural awareness, and they allow students of color time to study their heritage in a way that white students have been doing in history classes for centuries. Unit 5 is in the process of beginning to offer a multicultural course for upperclassmen. This is a huge step in the right direction and something we can be proud of in our community. Illinois should consider a multicultural class as part of the state high school graduation requirements. Multicultural classes allow students to orient themselves ethnically. According to a study of Mexican American students cited by Associate Professor of Education at the University of Arizona, Nolan L. Cabrera, students who were engaged in one multicultural class saw an increase in school attendance, grades, accumulation of academic credits, and likelihood to graduate from high school. Multicultural classes offer benefits outside of those associated with being more culturally competent. The next step for both Bloomington-Normal and Illinois as a whole could be to provide racial literacy training for teachers. Teachers cannot host productive discussion about race and racism if they've not been educated themselves. This is important in all classrooms, not just multicultural learning spaces, because school is a place where students ask questions. Even if an English teacher isn't teaching from a novel centered around race, race and racism can be linked to all sorts of novels. If students ask questions relating to those topics, teachers need to be prepared to answer in an informed way, which is sensitive to students of all colors. Finally, Bloomington-Normal and the state of Illinois should consider re-examining their history curriculum. Once teachers have been trained to tackle conversations about race and racism in the classroom, students need to be learning American history as just that, American history. Students right now are mostly learning white American history, and this is irresponsible and a selective teaching of the facts. There are many established programs to aid teachers in this endeavor. Perhaps the most well-known is the 1619 Project, which aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. This curriculum is designed for teachers to easily pair with their existing lesson plans to fill in details and historical narratives, which are frequently glazed over or left out entirely of history books. Multicultural classes will allow teachers to explore the history and cultures of many races, including Latinx, Indigenous Americans, and Asian Americans. Curriculums like the 1619 Project will educate students specifically about the origins of the most prevalent racial discourse they are exposed to today through the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. Educators will only be able to teach this truth-laden curriculum well if they've been trained to do so, specifically in terms of hosting discussion about race and racism. While this curriculum is easy to use for educators, that doesn't mean it will be easy to discuss with students. And that's the most important part of this issue. Only when we break through the difficult conversations about race and racism in the classroom will Black students have a chance to really learn about their history in a way that white students have for centuries. And only then will students begin to understand why systemic racism shapes our country in the way that it does today. I'll go ahead now and hand it over to Jake to conclude our presentation.
Thank you so much, Megan. So in conclusion, the issues facing people of color in Bloomington-Normal and across the United States are multifaceted and they intersect. As we've seen, wealth inequality contributes to school funding, and school funding then contributes to income inequality, which then, the income you have today turns into wealth tomorrow. And then access to things like internet depends on your wealth and on your income. It changes how well you're able to perform in school. And all of these issues are only exacerbated by times of crisis like the pandemic. So we've done our best to highlight some of these issues. And we hope throughout we've given the impression, the fact that behind every statistic is a individual, there's a story behind every individual story. There is a larger narrative that they are a part of. No two stories are exactly the same, but there's important implications for whenever groups of people are all going through something so similar. And so some of the solutions we've tried to touch on, we hope address these issues, such as the wealth tax, especially in order to address the disproportionate amount of school funding that comes from property taxes, and especially in light of Illinois' issues. And both the issues that communities of color face, as well as the important role they've played in shaping our country for the better, need to take a front seat in education curriculum for all Illinois students. And with that, we'd like to thank you all so very much for your time. And we will open up the floor for questions. And in this case, please put things in the chat. You can also use the participants, if you hit participants at the bottom, and then hit the little raise hand. We will see that you have raised your hands.
Thanks for the question, Mary. I saw that one that's up in the chat. Regarding the, I do not know if it is a similar system with the school, but yeah, just keeping in mind for the potential solution for the pension problem and how it's related to a lot of the responsibility of past legislators, just to kind of keep in mind to have the retirees and future retirees in that conversation for the potential solution. But yeah, I do not have an answer for your specific question at the end there.
to add to that, part of that too, with talking about like school funding, I think it is Vermont that is usually cited as having like the most equitable funding system. This is distinct from like the pension issues with like the way teachers, to my understanding, the situation is you're correct. The funds existed and went to other things for some reason. But when it comes to the way school funding is done, it has more to do with what percent comes from property taxes, what percent comes from state, and what percent comes from federal taxes. And so Vermont, they take all of the property taxes and all the state taxes, and they put it into one pot, and that gets like evenly distributed throughout the schools. Versus when it's property taxes, and you can kind of see this if you look at like teacher income by area. If you look in sort of like the collar counties around Chicago, a lot of those teachers are paid. I went to one of the schools up there, and basically every teacher I had was making over 100,000 a year. Teachers lower down in the state, that is very much not the case. And so it has to do with that level of funding. Some of the collar counties, there are more affluent families, and so that gets put into the school. Another issue of that too is the way that I'm pretty sure more money goes out of Chicago in terms of funding than goes into Chicago, which also exacerbates some issues.
I see the Miss Campbell Jackson raised her hand. You got a question?
Yes, and this is an impeccable time to just once again, first of all, thank you guys. I think it's quite indicative that you all have invested just an enormous amount of time. So can we all just kind of give it up to them with either snaps or a round of applause? And then we certainly want to continue to entertain the questions. You guys have been awesome. We do have a couple of professors on the phone. I know Dr. Hoff, I think I saw Dr. Pam on the phone. We have some youth council leaders. Miss Lisa's on, and I think I saw Coach is on, Coach Thomas is on. So if you guys have any questions, I saw a couple of comments in the chat, but maybe Coach, if you would like to elaborate what you have in there about the 1619 project, and that'll have to spark some more dialogue. What do you think?
Absolutely. I'm trying to get to my camera here. All right, there we go. In Unit 5, I was asked before the school year if we were planning to use the 1619 project. And of course, or had we used it? And my answer was no, we had not used it yet, but I plan on using it because it's just the truth. So we have to really be careful because there are some groups, some local groups that don't want us necessarily teaching the truth in class. So let's definitely be aware of that.
Excellent to know. And because of their research, we now have data to support the efficacy of teaching those areas. And I see there are a few students on too. Miss Camille is on, so that's awesome. I know I saw Mr. Bradley, so this is good dialogue. Anybody else? Questions for our students at Illinois State University? Students, do you want to talk a little bit about what we discussed a few meetings ago with the whole internet issue and how some students literally who are learning at home didn't even have a desk? So some of them were on the floor learning, outside learning, because some of the things that maybe we take for granted and assume all students have, some of those students were just disadvantaged and didn't have the proper desk and writing utensils to succeed. So your recommendation regarding internet access and making it a utility, I never thought about that, but why not make it as available as water is? Wouldn't that help to level the playing field? What do you think, students?
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like that would definitely level the playing field a little bit. And I feel like, you know, if they have the right materials, the right tools, they'll be on the right path to succeed. So yeah, like if that becomes like, you know, something like a utility bill where like you just put in internet, that'd be an awesome solution.
Yeah, and then especially in this past year of COVID and how it really highlighted the importance of the internet in today's society, and how like without that you're at a severe disadvantage, and that's very easy to see, especially this past year and any future situations like that. And it shouldn't have this, family shouldn't have to choose between like eating or having internet for their schooling for their kids.
How easy was it to reach out and talk to some of our educators? I believe you guys may have visited some folks at District 87 and Unit 5. Did we find that it was easy to gather this data and some of the research? What did you find?
Yes, from my experience, and also I know Megan had a lot of interviews as well. People were very responsive to interviewing with us and talking with us and sharing their insight on the issues that we were discussing. And it was amazing the feedback we got. So I appreciate everybody who was involved with that. And I hope that this is something we can push forward with in future projects. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in my experience, people were very willing to help. I did have one individual, I asked if I could ask her the questions that I had prepared, and she said yes, I could send them to her. She was working in the district, I think it was Unit 5. I emailed them to her and she never responded. So I'm not sure if that was she forgot or maybe she didn't like the nature of the questions too much. I'm not sure. But besides that, I had very helpful support. Coach helped me a lot with my research, and he gave me a lot of insight into the education side of things. So I really appreciate that.
I also, not to go on a tangent or steer us off. I saw Mary had a question about seeing the resources, getting your hands on some of the resources yourself. I dropped one link that, to my understanding, sort of houses a lot of the 1619 like lesson plans. I think it is like geared towards like school, like a classroom, but I think it would be pretty easy to, like in a school, like a homeschool setting, or in some sort of other setting if you wanted to take pieces out of it. And then I was also going to share this as well. This is the ISU like library. They will put together like different guides for things. Sometimes it's even down to like the class, like when I was in social work, the social work librarian put together like a little guide for our class for while we were researching our term paper. But about a year ago, I think they made one that is like systematic racism, which is kind of a huge undertaking to try and put even in as expansive as a guide as this, but it is really honestly I think a super awesome resource, from statistical sources to books, if that is what you're looking for, podcast articles. And the articles even go down and cites articles in the Bloomington-Normal area. So you have a rather wide expanse, definitely worth looking into, even if you're well versed on the topic. I think there's enough information here that everyone could find something interesting from it.
I think there might be another question in the chat that may have come from our pal, Miss Sarah. Do you want to pose the question, or do you want them to just read it from the chat? Whatever's your pleasure, Sarah. Thank you.
I don't really have a preference, but since I'm unmuted, I'll read it. Did any of your study include meeting with state legislators? And what prompted me to ask that? I mean, there's lots of reasons to meet with them, but for example, back in February, when the Illinois General Assembly was voting in their joint committee on administrative rules to include culturally responsive teaching and leading standards, Dan Brady was in the featured in WGLT article talking about how we need a mandate and all this. So maybe Coach B can answer that. he has his hands up. I don't know, but
I'm not really sure of that. I really haven't been hearing much of that being mandated. The last thing we were mandated was civics under Governor Rauner. And I'm 51 years old and have never taken civics. So that was kind of interesting to me, and we're still doing that, but I'm hoping that we do move to something more multicultural. I just wanted to add that too many of our students of color are students who are not showing up to school under COVID. I mean, at all. And the state is allowing makeup and recovery credits, and they're paying for it. So for any students that we do know who need to make up credits, let's make sure that they understand public school is at this point paying for summer school for free, makeup recovery for free, understanding that some students did not have equity in technology.
That's awesome information, and that's something good that we'll like to socialize, because that's our reality, unfortunately. And we know there are probably a multitude of reasons as to why students aren't showing up, but certainly knowing that there's an opportunity for them to play catch up is something that we will definitely, Coach B, try to get out and socialize that data. So thank you for sharing. You know, interesting, a lot of you guys, and I know we're getting close to 7, but a lot of you guys were on our panel with the school board members. And as you know, all the school board members were there. It didn't matter if they were Republicans or Democrats, they were all present from both school districts. So a few of our students, I believe Ms. Camille was on, I think Bradley was on, there were quite a few of them. They asked these school board candidates directly, what do you think about 1619, that project? What do you think about having racially diverse classes, courses? Will you do it? So they were very poignant, and all of them, without fail, responded in the affirmative. So then we concluded that meeting and said, okay, so for whoever is elected, let's get back together in 6 months, a year, to see how much progress we've made. So now that they've made the commitment to our children, coupled with the information that the ISU students have offered, I think we're in an awesome place. We not only have the qualitative data, of course, it's always good to have the narrative, but you guys have backed it up with the quantitative data as well. And for that, we thank you guys. We have time probably for one more question, if there's anything else that you guys would like to discuss before we make closing comments.
Please, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, I just had a question, and I think it'd be good for the students to comment, but I'd also be interested in any of the other members here on what you think the next project, should be, and building on this, because, this was great work, by the way, and I think you set, a great foundation. But let's build on that foundation. And I'm sure, as you were going through this, you thought, well, it'd be nice to do a deeper dive into, this particular area or that particular area. Or maybe as you're hearing something tonight, as one of the members, you could say, boy, it would be nice if we followed up on that. Because we'd like to, continue this discussion, continue the research, and even, throughout potentially the summer, I have some paid, positions that we could work on, but certainly for the ICC project, kind of going forward, what would you see as additional research that would, be, a good projects or good topics based on the foundation that you've set here?
Just kind of building on some of the, I would say, the communication side, and just keeping more avenues of communication between all these various groups that may not have had that before. So just kind of increasing the open dialogue there. And then for the other issues, maybe, as we mentioned before, more like including legislators in the dialogues more in the future.
Valid point, and thank you for that. I know we're right at 6:59, and you can best believe Madam President has that on her agenda, meeting with the legislators, and we're calling everyone to the tables those in the education, the health spectrum, because it's all interconnected. And I think someone may have mentioned that at the beginning. If you're healthy, you can probably go out and do some things to get that wealth, and then you can have the quality education. So it is all interconnected. I would like to personally, as we approach 7 o'clock, thank you guys. And I'll tell you, Mr. Carrillo, a huge appreciation to you, because as you know, you reached out to Madam Prez and I and Mr. Ben maybe 6 months ago and said, you know, I have an opportunity that will not only benefit the students, but the NAACP as well. So now you awesome college students, you can add this to your resume, and you can certainly let them know that you researched an issue for the NAACP. We're available to serve as references for you guys. And many have asked about the recording. So yes, the recording will be made available. If you can send it over to us, then we will share with our broad distribution list. But I cannot thank you guys enough. We're very impressed with the deliverable, and we will keep that PowerPoint in our repository. So when people try to question the necessity, Coach B, for the 1619 project, we can show how students are more engaged when they have something that they can relate to. So on behalf of the NAACP and President Linda Foster again, I thank you. Mr. Ben, as our treasurer, have you anything to offer?
I just want to say that the students did an outstanding job. This really gives us a lot to think about and work on. We'll regroup and figure out where to go from here. So thank you so much.
Exactly. Thank you guys. Right at 7 p.m. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone. Joseph, would you like us to hang back for a minute?
Yeah, I want you to hang back for me. I just want to say my thank yous and all that.
And
Super.
And that's why I just stayed on a little longer. You guys were phenomenal. Where is Mr. Carrillo? Did he stay on? Did he leave?
I think he headed out.
Did he leave?
Yeah.
Well, certainly, I just wanted to thank you guys. Oh, and that's our president coming on. I gave them your best regards. Madam Prez, they dropped the mic. How about that?